bond.
I was going to say, a combination
bond.
of, I don't know how many sneakers he'd have to sell, Rick, to try to make up a dent in this bill. But I'm thinking about those supporters, and I'm thinking about the sneakers. Sure. Joking aside, yesterday, there was a guy who reportedly paid $9,000 at an auction for those sneakers. And my God, in my head, my mind was blown away, because I'm thinking of these loyal supporters that have already stepped in to help the ex-president, launching a GoFundMe. It has already raised over $300,000. You know, this is a guy who was just found to be a fraud in a court of law, and ordinary Americans are throwing basically their life savings and more cash at him, and the grift continues.
You know, one of the best quotes I ever heard about Donald Trump was from an actual billionaire in New York. When I went to him in 2015 and said, well, this guy's going to be a problem, he's a billionaire. He goes, whoa, 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 wait a second. Donald Trump is not a billionaire. He is a clown living on credit. And what we see is this: he's constantly hopping from one financial play to another. There is a certain amount of money you're going to be able to raise from the MAGA voter pool in small dollar donations, and they have bled that list of people dry. They have bled those people to the point where, you know, they're waiting for their Social Security or their disability check to come in every month before they can kick in another $25 to save Donald Trump from the deep state or whatever fantasy he's selling them. It is a powerful bond with them, but that's not going to get him the amount of cash he needs in this deal in time to avoid further consequences, I think, to his personal finances and his corporate finances.
Danny, federal election law prohibits the use of campaign funds to pay for personal use, including things like legal debts. It gets a little bit murkier with PACs. And I just want to, from your legal expertise, where can or who can Trump continue to tap into for money to pay for his legal bills?
You stated the law accurately. It's murky when it comes to PACs because they are a relatively new creation. So as you've seen, he can do GoFundMes, he can accept other kinds of, he can get into the sneaker business. But one of the things to consider, building on what Rick said, is that Trump probably isn't as liquid as he makes himself out to be. If you go to just the civil fraud case that we just had here, part of that, as I understand it, involved loans that Donald Trump had supposedly taken out because he wasn't liquid enough to pay his Trump University case decision or settlement judgment. That goes back to 2016, just to give you an idea. So Donald Trump may not be nearly as liquid as he says, and Rick's reporting, or what he heard from actual billionaires, may be spot on. So that is a major problem for someone who has to pay judgments like this. Another thing I think is really interesting, in the ordinary civil case, after a gigantic verdict, often the plaintiff will go to the defendant and say, hey, listen, instead of going through appeal, why don't we talk about settling this case? We'll take a haircut on it. We'll take pennies on the dollar. Not pennies, but we'll reduce the verdict significantly. It's interesting that when you're dealing with Donald Trump, that isn't even on the table. Right. No matter whether or not he's liquid, whether or not he has the money to pay, whether or not he can put up the bond. It seems to me that no plaintiff, the AG, no one has ever even thought of approaching
Why do you think
counsel.
that is as a lawyer? Why do you think he would not entertain that idea or does not want to entertain that idea?
Because it's inconsistent with his mission, which is fight, 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 fight. By the way, Eamon, there are even insurance companies today that take that same approach to litigation. They're known as the we never settle, we're always going to trial. Donald Trump is just a version of the same thing. Because when you use that litigation strategy, the idea is if word gets out that you're a defendant that settles, a corporate defendant or an insurance company, then the sharks will circle. And Donald Trump appears to have taken the approach that it is far better to stave off for another day a judgment than to have to open my wallet and pay less money today when I may end up having to pay more money later.
Suzanne, there's some larger context here that is important to note, and you've reported about this on the ongoing IRS audit going on behind closed doors. Walk us through that. Is this just the beginning for Trump, and why is that so important for him amidst all of these legal challenges?
Sure, and I want to talk about that because it's really important, but I just want to key off a little bit of what Danny said about the settlement.
Sure.
I think in this case, I'm not sure the Attorney General would have settled. Trump has a long history of saying, I never settle. He settles so many cases. We don't know exactly what went on between the two of them, but I have a feeling that there may not have been a lot of interest in the Attorney General in settling this case ahead of time, and I can't imagine there will be now. I think we're going to see this going to appeals. But on the IRS case, it's less talked about. but very important. And we reported it in 2020 in some stories that we did when we got a voluminous amount of his tax information. And in that information, we could see that he had an audit going on. It is going on for years, and it hadn't settled as of the time that we ran the story. We don't know for sure that it has not been settled yet. It's just going on behind closed doors. It may have been, I sense not, but we don't know. But that audit, if it goes against him, at the time in 2020 when we reported it, it could have cost him in excess of $100 million. And that's an audit with an issue that the interest is clocking, so it's probably even higher now. And that is just one issue, and I'm always careful to say I know what I know. Right. I don't know probably a lot. There could be other issues out there lurking like that for Donald Trump that we just don't know about that could be a potential cash drain for him.
And there is an element to this, Rick, that some would argue is a national security risk, right? It doesn't immediately jump to our conscience, but when you think about it in detail, look, this is a candidate for public office, let alone a candidate for president. He is cash strapped, and this presents a serious liability. In fact, Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen, spoke to my colleagues earlier today about this. Take a listen.
You have the head of one of our two major parties that's financially cash strapped.
Simone was just making this point.
We need to be very careful about him as a potential president because he's for sale.
He is for sale. How concerned does Trump's current financial state make you about a candidate, a leader of the Republican Party?
Look, I think Donald Trump's financial vulnerability has always been out there. This is a guy who would chase a dollar bill, as James Carville used to say, through a trailer park if it was on a fishing line. This is a guy who wants money all the time. He is always looking to make something else out of his latest disasters. And so I'm worried that, I don't think the Saudis gave Jared $2 billion because he's a nice guy. I'm worried that Donald Trump will be out there for sale to the highest bidder. Let's put it very bluntly. This is not a man who puts America first. He puts himself first. And if he needs to borrow money from the shadiest possible sources, I'm sure he would. And he's going to have a hard time getting it from legitimate sources because of some of the constraints in this, not being able to borrow from banks that are based in New York or that have the license to operate in New York. So he's going to be looking out. This is the guy basically going out for the payday loan market. And the president, that's a dangerous position.
Yeah, very dangerous one indeed. Danny, Rick, please stick around. Suzanne, Craig, thank you so much for your time and your insights. Always a pleasure. Next up, Jack Smith urges the Supreme Court to dismiss Trump's claim of immunity for January 6th. What happens if they sign